We are here today at the High Court of Australia in Canberra, where the controversial yet successful plain packaging case has made its way to the alcohol industry. Inside, we have a representative for various health advocacy groups lobbying the Australian government to apply similar regulations to alcohol-related products, and the appeals of the counterparty, a representative of the Australian Liquor Association. Advising on further action of the Australian government regarding said regulations is a representative of the WTO panel, who will be overseeing the discussion. This is the final round of talks, economic matters having been discussed prior regarding this matter.
Good evening. We're gathered here today to discuss the appropriate action going forward by Australia and its alcohol regulations. The panel has received the proposed regulations set forth by health advocacy groups that take example from regulations successfully applied on tobacco products in Australia. Namely, this is to amend current regulations concerning labeling to allow only uniform packaging and labeling of alcohol-related products. If allowed, these regulations would apply to both domestically produced and imported products. The objective of these regulations is to reduce the negative social and health-related impacts of alcohol consumption and thus to protect public, that is to say, human health. The aim of today's discussion is to consider the legal implications of the proposed regulations, specifically in the context of the World Trade Organization and accompanying agreements of which we are a member state. Now let's begin by hearing the Liquor Association's appeals against the proposed regulations. Mr. Lang?
Thank you, Mr. Orgel. Now, in the context of the WTO, we at the Liquor Association find the proposed regulations to breach numerous articles of the WTO package of agreements. These are Articles 2.2 and 2.4 of the TBT, Article 20 of the TRIPS, and Article 9 of the GATT. To begin, I believe it is appropriate to question whether the proposed regulations legitimately fulfill the objective. While it can be argued that theoretically, plain packaging may help to reach the legitimate objective of reducing harmful health effects in tobacco, as there is no safe level of tobacco use, alcohol cannot be regarded in the same manner. Studies have shown that alcohol consumption, when consumed in moderation, can aid in the prevention of cardiovascular disease. Similarly, it is arguable that violence and alcohol are also influenced by a number of variables within a person's environment, including age, personality traits, and their predisposition of aggression. This puts into evidence that alcohol-induced violence is influenced by the interaction of a variety of factors, and it is not a definite precursor to violent behaviour. As such, the policy proposals must understand the complex interaction between alcohol and its related health and social effects to design policies that do not portray a black and white judgment of alcohol's impact. Taking this into account, as well as considering the barriers to trade that this will pose internationally, we can assure that it is not to be the least trade restrictive measure, and the parties involved have not exhausted any other alternatives, breaching Article 2.2 of TBT. The economic implications of such a proposal will prove detrimental to trade, as microbreweries valued at approximately $38.1 billion USD globally would be significantly impacted by the plain packaging proposal. In the craft beer industry, the capability to distinguish competitive goods and services from others is vital, as 71% of the craft beer buyers make their purchase decision based on packaging. As a result, if labels and bottle shapes were to become uniform, this would minimize the consumer's ability to differentiate between perceived quality brands through intangible assets such as trademarks, branding, and accreditations, thus materially reducing the value of the product and breaching Article 9, Section 4 of the GATT. Additionally, this would prove detrimental to the capability to distinguish the goods or services of one undertaking from those of other undertakings, hence breaching TRIPS Article 20, Section 10. The effect of the labelling policy will drive small and medium business owners out of a competitive price zone, potentially impacting the the economy of thousands of citizens from exporting member states. This will likely lead to disputes from our trade partners, as this will harm their relative industries and thus breach Article 9, Section 2 of the GATT. Similarly, the lack of relevant international standards for plain packaging on alcoholic beverages evidently demonstrate that a regulation may not contribute towards the achievement of its objective. Article 20 of the GATT is not applicable as a defence against a breach of Article 20 of the TRIPS Agreement. Consequently, it is observable that these regulations and proposals are burdensome and costly to outweigh the unproven fulfillment of the legitimate objective. Thank you.
Mr. Ripoll, if you'd like to present your argument.
Thank you, Mr. Orgil. The harmful effects of alcohol consumption have already reached peak interest by the international community, with organizations such as the WHO and the Global Alcohol Strategy, which aims to minimize the risk to the drinker of injuries and death through falls, drunk driving, violence, and self-harm, and to others around him. The general concern of alcohol-related violence has made it the most recurring topic in the TBT agenda, and it is what has brought us here today. Australia's plain packaging policy on tobacco was a success, and we understand that even if tobacco and alcohol have different natures, the measures need to consider the same structure and rigorosity in terms of the labeling. We understand that the design of the policy actually fulfills the legitimate objective, and that desired effect will contribute to the transformation of the Australian drinking culture. We can see that the emerging evidence indicates a prominent front of container labels with rotating graphic and text messages that are specific in detail and that also contain statistics may be even more effective in shifting consumption patterns than the existing label schemes. Also, we have started to have recent backup for the passing of the policy. For example, our report performed by Public Health England proposed extending the plain packaging to alcohol, which says that we could even modify the shapes of the bottles to reduce the appeal of excessive consumption. Also, we can argue that the increasing price and labeling restrictions can reduce the amount of violent cases in Australia because, for example, the WHO released a study which stated that a 10% increase in the price of beer would actually reduce the number of college students involved in violence each year by 4%. The Health Advocacy Group can argue that even if our proposed regulations were to breach existing agreements our government is bound to, Article 20 of the Section B of the GATT will be applicable, as these regulations are necessary in order to protect human health, and in many cases they would bypass these breaches because it outweighs the potential effects that they may have, thus making the panel accept these policies. We need you to understand that the study and evidence of the alcohol industry is based on a minimum effort, and it is crucial to look out for the well-being of Australian citizens.
Now, the regulatory initiatives set forth by the lobbying groups on alcohol restriction have neglected the different natures of alcohol and their interaction with the consumer. Furthermore, a lack of scientific evidence results in a failure to prove that policies with a similar design will fulfill their legitimate objective before the WTO framework. This is indisputable, as no evidence exists to suggest that plain packaging will reduce the overall demand for alcohol products and fails to fulfill the objective. Finally, as studies confirm that a safe level of alcohol usage does exist, this policy falls into a generalized vision of alcohol's effect on the body. With all of this being said, we can see that in general terms, these regulations and proposals are too burdensome and costly to outweigh the unproven fulfillment of the legitimate objective. To conclude this meeting, I find these proposed measures to be unlikely to be accepted by the World Trade Organization panel, as stated by Mr. Leng. Therefore, the Parliament will not pass these measures.